Welcome to Daily Family Crimes, where we explore the darkest corners of family dysfunction and betrayal. Today's story will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty and love. Trust is a fragile thing. It takes years to build, seconds to shatter, and sometimes, it's broken by the very people who should protect you most. This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a man whose world crumbled not because of strangers or enemies, but because of the two women he loved most in this world. Sometimes the deadliest poison comes from the sweetest cup. Marcus Thompson was raised right. Every Sunday morning, you'd find him in the third pew at Mount Olive Baptist Church, sitting next to his grandmother, Rosa Thompson, who'd raised him since he was 8 years old. Rosa was a woman of faith and principle, working double shifts at the textile factory to keep food on the table and Marcus in school. "Boy, remember this," she'd tell him every night after dinner, her weathered hands folded in prayer. "The Lord tests us all, but He never gives us more than we can handle. Stay on the righteous path, and righteousness will follow you." Rosa had taken Marcus in after his mother died in a car accident and his father disappeared into a bottle that he never climbed out of. She worked her fingers to the bone, sacrificing everything to make sure Marcus had a chance at something better. She made sure he understood the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the power of faith. By the time Marcus turned 32, he seemed to have everything figured out. He had a steady job at the city's water treatment facility, decent pay with good benefits. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid the bills. He'd married Natasha, a beautiful woman he'd met at his cousin's wedding, and they had a daughter together, little Maya, who was the light of both their lives. They lived in a modest two-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where kids could ride their bikes in the street and neighbors knew each other's names. Marcus had worked overtime and saved every penny to put a down payment on that house. It represented everything he'd worked for, everything he'd dreamed of giving his family. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The city faced budget cuts, and Marcus's hours were slashed from 40 to 25 per week. What had been a comfortable living became a constant struggle. The mortgage payments that had once been manageable became a monthly nightmare. Utilities got shut off. Credit cards maxed out. The car started making sounds that meant expensive repairs they couldn't afford. Natasha had been understanding at first, but as the months wore on and things got worse instead of better, her patience began to wear thin. She'd grown up in a different world, one where money was never a concern, where her mother, Victoria, had always provided for her without question. "We can't live like this forever, Marcus," Natasha would say, scrolling through social media posts of her friends' vacations and shopping trips. "Maya deserves better than this. She deserves to have nice things, to go to a good school, to have opportunities." Marcus would nod and promise that things would get better, that he was looking for a second job, that something would come through. But deep down, he was starting to wonder if his best efforts would ever be enough. The weight of failure pressed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe, hard to sleep, hard to look his daughter in the eyes when she asked why they couldn't go to McDonald's like her friends. The breaking point came when Maya got sick.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you and back to the video.
What started as a simple fever turned into something more serious, requiring a hospital stay and tests that their insurance only partially covered. The medical bills arrived like an avalanche, each envelope containing another $1,000 demand that might as well have been $1 million. That's when Victoria, Natasha's mother, made her grand entrance back into their lives. Victoria Palmer was everything Marcus wasn't. Wealthy, connected, confident in the way that only comes from never having to worry about money. She lived in a penthouse downtown, drove luxury cars, and wore jewelry that cost more than Marcus made in a year. She'd never approved of her daughter's marriage to Marcus, had made that clear from day one. "My baby deserves so much more than this," she'd whispered to Natasha at their wedding, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "But we'll see how long this lasts." Now, with Marcus's family drowning in debt, Victoria saw her opportunity. "I can help," she told them over dinner at an expensive restaurant that Marcus couldn't afford but she'd insisted on. "I have connections, business opportunities. Ways to make real money, not this penny-ante stuff Marcus is doing." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "What kind of business opportunities?" Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Import and export. Very lucrative for the right kind of person. Someone reliable, someone who can follow instructions, someone who needs to provide for his family." The conversation was carefully vague, but Marcus wasn't stupid. He knew what Victoria was really talking about. The expensive cars, the penthouse, the mysterious business that required no office and no employees, it all painted a picture that made his stomach turn. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said carefully, "but I think I'll stick to legitimate work." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Legitimate work doesn't seem to be paying Maya's medical bills. That night, after they'd put Maya to bed, Natasha confronted Marcus in their bedroom. "She's trying to help us, Marcus. Why are you being so stubborn?" "Because what she's offering isn't help, it's trouble. The kind of trouble that destroys families." Natasha sat on the edge of their bed, her head in her hands. "We're already being destroyed, Marcus. Look around. Look at what we've become. Maya needs surgery, and we can't afford it. The mortgage is 3 months behind. They're going to take our house." Marcus wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat because she was right. They were drowning, and he had no idea how to swim to shore. "Just think about it," Natasha whispered. "One job. One time. Enough money to get us back on our feet." Over the next few days, Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria's offer more than he wanted to admit. He researched second jobs, third jobs, anything legitimate that might bring in extra income. But the math was simple and brutal. There weren't enough hours in the day to earn what they needed through honest work, at least not in time to save their house and pay for Maya's surgery. It was Rosa who finally pushed him over the edge, though she never knew it. His grandmother had been battling diabetes for years, and the medication was expensive. She'd been rationing her insulin, trying to make it last longer, and Marcus had been sending her what little money he could spare. But it wasn't enough, and one evening she collapsed in her kitchen, alone. Marcus found her the next morning when she didn't answer her phone. She was alive, barely, but the damage was done. Her blood sugar had been dangerously high for too long. The doctors said she might not wake up from the coma. Standing in that hospital room, looking at the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He called Victoria. The job was exactly what Marcus had expected and dreaded. A drive to Atlanta, pick up a package, drive it back to Charlotte. No questions asked, no details provided. $5,000 for 12 hours of work, more money than Marcus had seen in one place in years. Victoria's instructions were precise. Take the interstate, drive the speed limit, look like any other business traveler making a routine trip. The package would be small, unmarked, and he was to put it in his spare tire well and forget it existed until delivery. This is a one-time thing, Marcus told himself as he prepared for the drive. Just enough to get us caught up, to pay for Maya's surgery and Rosa's medical bills. After this, we'll figure out another way. The drive to Atlanta was peaceful. Marcus played gospel music and tried to pretend he was just a man on a business trip, not a man carrying something that could destroy his life. He picked up the package from a parking garage downtown, a small, wrapped box that felt heavier than it should have. On the drive back, Marcus found himself praying for the first time in months. Not the desperate, bargaining prayers he'd been offering lately, but the kind of prayer Rosa had taught him as a child. Prayers of gratitude, of seeking guidance, of asking for strength. He was still praying when the blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. The traffic stop seemed routine at first. License and registration, the usual questions about where he was going and where he'd been. But then the officer asked him to step out of the car, and Marcus knew his life was about to change forever. "Would like to search your vehicle, sir. Do I have a choice?" The officer's smile was thin. "You always have a choice. But we've got a K9 unit on the way, and if that dog alerts, we're searching anyway. Save us all some time." Marcus thought about Rosa lying in that hospital bed, about Maya needing surgery, about the house they were about to lose. He thought about running, about fighting, about demanding a lawyer. But mostly, he thought about how he'd let everyone down. "Go ahead," he said quietly. They found the package in less than 10 minutes. 2 kilograms of pure cocaine, street value around $200,000. Enough to put Marcus away for decades under the federal sentencing guidelines. As they put the handcuffs on him, Marcus couldn't help but wonder how the police had known to stop him. How they'd known exactly where to look. The traffic stop had been too smooth, too organized, too targeted to be random. The answer came during his trial, 6 months later. Marcus had been sitting in county jail, unable to make bail, watching his life fall apart piece by piece. Rosa had passed away 2 weeks after his arrest, never waking up from her coma. The house had been foreclosed on. Maya was living with Victoria and Natasha in the penthouse, and Marcus hadn't seen his daughter in 4 months. His court-appointed attorney was a tired-looking public defender named Jennifer Walsh, who was handling 47 cases and could barely remember Marcus's name from one meeting to the next. She'd advised him to take a plea deal, 15 years instead of the 25 he was facing if convicted at trial. "The evidence is overwhelming," she told him. "They've got you cold with the drugs, plus they have witnesses who'll testify about your involvement in the trafficking operation." "What witnesses?" Marcus had asked. That's when Jennifer had shown him the prosecution's witness list. 2 names that made his blood run cold, Natasha Thompson and Victoria Palmer. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. His wife and mother-in-law, the 2 people who'd pushed him into this nightmare, were now testifying against him to save themselves. The trial was a masterclass in manipulation and lies. Natasha took the stand wearing a conservative black dress, her hair pulled back, tears streaming down her face as she painted a picture of Marcus as a controlling, violent man who'd forced her to participate in his drug operation. "He said if I didn't help him, he'd hurt Maya," she testified, her voice breaking at just the right moments. "He said I was either with him or against him, and if I was against him, I'd regret it." Victoria was even more convincing, playing the role of the concerned mother trying to protect her daughter and granddaughter from a dangerous man. She testified about overhearing Marcus's phone calls planning drug runs, about his violent outbursts when she tried to intervene, about her fear for her family's safety. "I tried to get Natasha to leave him," Victoria said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But she was too scared. He'd isolated her from her friends, controlled every aspect of her life. She felt trapped." Marcus sat in stunned silence as the two women he trusted most in the world systematically destroyed him. Every conversation was twisted, every moment of vulnerability used against him. They painted him as a monster, a man who'd threatened his own family to force them into criminal activity. The physical evidence was damning enough. Marcus had been caught red-handed with enough cocaine to put him away for life. But the testimony from Natasha and Victoria transformed him from a desperate man who'd made a terrible mistake into a career criminal who deserved no mercy. When Marcus's attorney cross-examined them, their stories were airtight, rehearsed to perfection. They'd clearly spent months preparing for this moment, anticipating every question, crafting every response. The only witness Marcus had was himself, and his attorney advised against testifying.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
"The prosecution will tear you apart," Jennifer had warned. "Your best bet is to hope the jury sees through their lies." But the jury didn't see through anything. They saw a man caught with drugs and two women brave enough to testify against him despite their fear. The deliberation lasted less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was a formality. Federal guidelines for trafficking that amount of cocaine were clear: 25 years minimum. The judge, an elderly woman who'd seen every sob story and excuse imaginable, showed no mercy. "Mr. Thompson," she said, looking down at him from her bench, "you had every opportunity to choose a different path. Instead, you chose to traffic in poison, to contribute to the destruction of communities and families. Your actions have consequences, not just for you, but for everyone around you." As they led Marcus away in shackles, he looked back at the courtroom one last time. Natasha and Victoria were already gone, but he could see their lawyer shaking hands with the prosecutor, smiling like they just closed a successful business deal. Which, Marcus realized, was exactly what they'd done. Millbrook Federal Prison became Marcus's new home, a concrete and steel fortress in the middle of nowhere. The first year was the hardest, adjusting to the rhythm of institutional life, learning the unwritten rules that kept you alive and out of trouble. Marcus kept to himself mostly, reading books from the prison library, taking correspondence courses, trying to better himself despite his circumstances. He wrote letters to Maya every week, though he never knew if she received them. Natasha had moved with Victoria to California, taking his daughter 3,000 miles away from the life they'd built together. It was during his second year inside that Marcus met Carlos, an older inmate from Miami who'd been down for 12 years. Carlos had a way of reading people, of seeing through the masks that everyone wore in prison. "You don't belong here," Carlos told him one day in the yard. "I mean, you belong here because you got caught, but this ain't who you are. You're not a criminal. You're just a man who got played." Marcus had told Carlos his story over the months, leaving out no details, including his growing suspicion about how perfectly everything had fallen into place. The convenient timing of Victoria's offer, the precise police response, the flawless testimony from two women who claimed to be victims. "Your wife and her mother," Carlos said, shaking his head. "They set you up from the beginning. That job, that package, that traffic stop, it was all planned." "But why?" Marcus asked. "What did they gain?" Carlos laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Man, you really don't know, do you? Your mother-in-law didn't just offer you one job. She offered you a way into the organization. But she needed someone clean, someone with no record, someone who could take the fall when things went south. The pieces started falling into place. Victoria's mysterious wealth, her connections, her ability to arrange everything so perfectly. She wasn't just connected to drug traffickers, she was running the operation. And Marcus had been the perfect patsy, a desperate man with a clean record who could be manipulated into taking the fall. They probably got immunity deals, Carlos continued. Testify against the mule, help us break up the trafficking ring, and walk away clean. Your wife gets to play the victim, your mother-in-law gets to eliminate a witness who knew too much, and you get to spend the next 25 years paying for their crimes. That night, lying on his narrow bunk, Marcus felt something change inside him. The guilt and shame that had been eating him alive for 2 years began to transform into something else. Something harder, colder, more focused. He started making phone calls. Prison phones were monitored, recorded, and regulated, but Marcus had learned how to work within the system. He called old friends, distant relatives, anyone who might have information about Victoria Palmer's business operations. He was careful, never saying anything directly incriminating, but asking questions, gathering intelligence. What he learned over the next 6 months confirmed his worst suspicions. Victoria had been running drugs from Miami through Charlotte for over a decade. She'd used a network of disposable mules, usually desperate men with clean records who could be manipulated into carrying packages. When they got caught, they went to prison. When they kept their mouths shut, their families got taken care of. When they didn't, Marcus learned about 3 other men over the past 5 years who'd been arrested under similar circumstances. All of them had been recruited by Victoria, all of them had been betrayed by people they trusted, and all of them were now serving long sentences in federal prison. But Marcus also learned something else, something that made his blood run cold. Victoria's operation was about to expand, and she was looking for new mules. Young men, desperate men, men like Marcus had been. Men like Tony Rodriguez, Maya's 17-year-old neighbor in California, whose family was struggling with medical debt. Like Deshaun Williams, the 19-year-old son of Marcus's old co-worker, who dropped out of college because he couldn't afford tuition. Like James Parker, Natasha's 22-year-old cousin, who was working 3 jobs to support his disabled mother. Victoria was recruiting a new generation of mules, and Marcus realized with growing horror that his own daughter might be next. Maya was only 8 now, but in a few years, she'd be old enough to be useful to her grandmother's operation. Old enough to carry packages, to take risks, to be sacrificed when things went wrong. That's when Marcus made his decision. The federal prison system has a reputation for being impossible to escape from, and that reputation is mostly deserved. But Marcus wasn't planning to escape with his body, he was planning to escape with information. Over the next year, he carefully documented everything he'd learned about Victoria's operation. Names, dates, locations, patterns of operation. He cross-referenced information from multiple sources, built a comprehensive picture of a criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for over a decade. The evidence was overwhelming. Victoria Palmer wasn't just a drug trafficker, she was the head of a criminal organization that had destroyed dozens of lives, ruined countless families, and corrupted everything it touched. And she'd been using her own daughter and granddaughter as cover, hiding behind the facade of respectability while running one of the most successful drug operations on the East Coast. Marcus knew he couldn't take this information to the same prosecutors who'd put him away. They'd been played just as badly as he had, convinced that they were breaking up a trafficking ring when they were actually helping the real criminals eliminate witnesses. Instead, he reached out to the Drug Enforcement Administration's Internal Affairs Division, the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, and the media outlets that specialized in investigative journalism. He compiled everything into a comprehensive package that told the complete story of Victoria Palmer's criminal empire and the innocence she'd sacrificed to protect herself. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. Federal agents raided Victoria's penthouse, her businesses, her storage facilities. They arrested 17 people in coordinated raids across 4 states. They seized millions of dollars in cash, drugs, and assets. Victoria Palmer was charged with running a continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. The evidence against her was overwhelming, built not just on Marcus's intelligence but on financial records, surveillance footage, and testimony from other victims of her operation. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, Natasha herself. Faced with her own arrest and the possibility of losing Maya to the foster care system, Natasha finally told the truth. She detailed how her mother had recruited Marcus, how they'd planned his downfall, how she'd been forced to testify against her own husband to protect herself and her daughter. "I was just as trapped as Marcus was," she said through tears during her proffer session with federal prosecutors. "My mother controlled everything, where I lived, what I did, who I could talk to. She said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't help her get rid of Marcus, she'd make sure I lost Maya forever." The truth was even worse than Marcus had suspected. Victoria hadn't just used him as a mule, she'd used him as a test case, a way to perfect her system of manipulation and betrayal. She'd recorded Natasha's testimony, used it as a training tool for other family members who might be called upon to betray their husbands, their sons, their fathers. Marcus had been the prototype for a system of calculated betrayal that Victoria planned to use indefinitely. The media coverage was extensive and brutal. Headlines screamed about the Black Widow of Charlotte, the woman who'd built a criminal empire on the bodies of the men she'd manipulated and destroyed. Investigative reporters dug into Victoria's past, revealing a trail of destroyed lives going back decades. The most heartbreaking stories were about the children left behind. Boys and girls who'd grown up without fathers, who'd been told their dads were criminals who'd abandoned them, who'd never known that their fathers had been manipulated into taking the fall for someone else's crimes. Maya's story became the centerpiece of the media coverage. An 8-year-old girl who'd been used as a pawn in her grandmother's game, who'd been raised to believe her father was a monster when he was actually a victim. The public outcry was enormous. Petition drives to review the cases of men who'd been convicted based on Victoria's operations. Congressional hearings about the failures in the justice system that had allowed such manipulation to continue for so long. Calls for reform in how federal prosecutors handled cases involving family testimony. But for Marcus, sitting in his prison cell, the most important news came in a letter from his new attorney, a criminal defense lawyer who'd taken his case pro bono after the truth came out. "The Department of Justice has agreed to review your conviction," the letter read. "Given the new evidence about prosecutorial misconduct and perjured testimony, there's a strong chance your conviction will be overturned. We're optimistic about getting you home within the next year." Marcus read the letter 3 times before it sank in. Home. After 5 years in federal prison, he might actually be going home. But even more important was the second letter that came that same day, written in the careful handwriting of a 10-year-old girl. "Dear Daddy," Maya had written. "Mommy told me the truth about what happened. About how Grandma Victoria lied and how you didn't really do bad things. I'm sorry I believed the lies. I love you and I want to see you. Can you come home soon? Love, Maya." Marcus wept reading that letter, the first tears he'd shed since Rosa's funeral. All the anger, all the pain, all the years of imprisonment seemed worth it in that moment. His daughter knew the truth. She knew he loved her. She wanted him to come home. The exoneration process took 8 months. Federal judges don't like admitting mistakes, and prosecutors fight hard against overturning convictions, even when the evidence is overwhelming. But Marcus's case had become too public, too clear-cut to ignore. On a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 6 years after his arrest, Marcus Thompson walked out of Millbrook Federal Prison a free man. Natasha was waiting for him in the parking lot, Maya holding her hand, both of them crying. The reunion was awkward at first. Too much pain, too much time, too much betrayal to overcome easily. But Maya ran to him anyway, throwing her small arms around his waist, and suddenly nothing else mattered. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered into his chest. "I'm sorry I didn't know." "It's not your fault, baby girl," Marcus whispered back. "None of this was your fault." Natasha stood back, uncertain, afraid. She'd cooperated with the investigation, had helped bring down her mother's organization, but she'd also betrayed Marcus in the most fundamental way possible. She'd testified against her own husband, had helped send him to prison for crimes he hadn't committed. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. And I wanted you to see Maya, to know that she knows the truth now." Marcus looked at his wife, this woman who'd been as much a victim as he had been, who'd been manipulated and controlled by her mother just as surely as he had been. The anger was still there, the hurt was still real, but underneath it all was something else, understanding. "We all made choices," he said finally. "Some of them were wrong. But Maya doesn't deserve to pay for our mistakes." They didn't get back together. Too much had been broken, too much trust had been shattered. But they found a way to co-parent, to give Maya the stability she needed while Marcus rebuilt his life. The state of North Carolina paid Marcus $2.3 million in compensation for his wrongful conviction. It wasn't enough to give him back 6 years of his life, wasn't enough to undo the damage that had been done, but it was enough to start over. Marcus used the money to buy a small house near where Maya lived with Natasha, close enough to see his daughter every day. He started a non-profit organization dedicated to helping the families of wrongfully convicted men, providing legal assistance and emotional support to people caught in the same nightmare he'd experienced. Victoria Palmer was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She died of a heart attack in federal custody 2 years later, taking her secrets and her manipulation to the grave. She never expressed remorse for the lives she'd destroyed, never acknowledged the pain she'd caused. The other men who'd been convicted based on her operations were gradually exonerated as well. Some had lost their entire families, had children who'd grown up and didn't want to know them. Others, like Marcus, found ways to rebuild, to create new relationships with the people they'd lost. On Maya's 16th birthday, Marcus stood in his backyard watching his daughter blow out candles on her cake, surrounded by friends and family who knew the truth about what had happened. She was beautiful, smart, kind, everything he'd hoped she'd become despite the trauma she'd endured. "Dad," she said later, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no that first time? If you'd never taken that job?" Marcus considered the question, one he'd asked himself thousands of times over the years. "I think about it sometimes," he said, "but I've learned that you can't live in the past. You can only learn from it and try to do better going forward." "Do you regret it?" "All of it." Marcus looked at his daughter, this strong, wise young woman who'd survived more trauma than most adults. "I regret the choices I made that hurt people. I regret the time we lost. But I don't regret that the truth finally came out. I don't regret that justice was finally served." Maya nodded, understanding in the way that children who've grown up too fast always do. "I'm proud of you, Dad. For surviving all of that. For fighting to come home." As the stars came out that night, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The betrayal had been devastating, had cost him years of his life and nearly destroyed his relationship with his daughter. But it had also revealed the truth about the people around him, had forced him to become stronger than he'd ever imagined possible. Victoria Palmer had thought she was destroying Marcus Thompson when she manipulated him into that first drug run. She'd thought she was eliminating a witness when she had him sent to prison. She'd thought she was protecting her criminal empire when she used his own family against him. but she'd been wrong about everything. Marcus had survived her betrayal, had exposed her operation, had protected his daughter from following in his footsteps. He'd lost 6 years of his life, but he'd gained something more valuable, the absolute certainty of who he was and what he stood for. The scar tissue from betrayal never completely heals, but it makes you stronger in the places where you've been broken. Marcus Thompson had been broken by the people he'd trusted most, but he'd rebuilt himself into something unbreakable. And on quiet nights like this one, sitting with his daughter under the stars, he knew that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding pain, but from surviving it with your integrity intact. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always obvious. But it's always possible, as long as there are people willing to fight for the truth, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs. Marcus Thompson had fought for 6 years to clear his name and reclaim his life. In the end, he'd won something more valuable than freedom. He'd won the chance to be the father his daughter deserved, and the knowledge that truth, however long delayed, always finds a way to surface. The greatest revenge against betrayal isn't more betrayal. It's living well, loving deeply, and never giving up on the possibility of justice. Marcus Thompson had learned that lesson the hard way, but he'd learned it completely. And that, perhaps, was worth everything he'd endured to get there. What do you think? Could you forgive someone who stole years of your life for their own gain? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Daily Family Crimes for more stories that explore the complicated dynamics of trust, betrayal, and justice within families.